Are
New companies moving in.
And that's the major, force behind. All right, we're good to go.
Hey everybody, thank you for tuning in. I've got Ellie Perlman back. Ellie, thank you for coming in today.
Absolutely. I always like to come back and chat with you about real estate stuff. So
That's because
I'm excited to be
we've
here.
got amazing followers that we're getting educated on real estate investing. On that note, today's going to be a little bit, get your pen and paper out for today, because we're really going to throw Ellie under the bus, because we're going to talk about underwriting. Very important part of real estate investing. So there's not a lot I can really talk about, because this is more your forte. So why don't you tell us, how do you underwrite your property, your investments?
I underwrite them with the worst case scenario, and if the deal still works, then it's a good deal. And I'll explain. It's really easy to get caught in the mindset of, right now the industry, real estate is, a lot of people are doing very well. The rents are increasing, demand is high, job growth is looking great. But we don't know what's going to happen in 4 to 5 years, and I'm going to provide you with some pointers on what to look for, the exact kind of things that you need to look at when you're running the numbers and underwriting a deal. And I'm going to start with the basic, stuff, which the basic element is the rent growth. So if you're holding on to a property, if you plan to hold on for 5 or 10 or 15 or 3, it doesn't matter, a certain amount of years, you're projecting what would be the rent growth throughout the whole period. And that will give you, that's part of the reason, investors run numbers so they can see, okay, if I hold it for 5 years or 10 years, this is what the returns are going to be like. If I hold it only for 7 years, that's what the return is going to be like, and that helps them determine how much they can pay for the property. When it comes to rent growth, there are 2 types of rent growth. One of them is organic growth, and which means how much rents are going to increase without you doing anything to the property. It's basically, it's market forces. Right now in some markets, you can see Orlando is a crazy market. Last year was about close to 7% organic growth.
What is driving that growth in Orlando?
Well, there's a lot of new employers that are attracting.
New companies moving in.
And that's the major, force behind rent growth in many, many markets. And you can have other markets that with as little as 0.5% or 1% rent growth. So you need to look at reports and see what was the history in that submarket, and where do you think, based on your experience, how would be the organic growth throughout the whole period. And nobody has a crystal ball.
How are you finding that information out? What companies are moving in? How do you find that?
So there are multiple ways to do that. The large brokerage firms have on their websites a lot of free reports. You can also go to Yardi Matrix. They have great reports, and IRR is also another company that they provide very detailed reports on specific markets. So you can see which sub-markets, how the rent growth was, what was the demand. And you can Google their names. You can go to Yardi Matrix Atlanta report, and you'll see quarterly and yearly and semi. You have a lot of free information out there, and you can basically look at the past and try and use an educated assumption on what the future is going to be. So
how far back do you go? A year?
Between a year and 5 years really depends on the market. If something new is happening. So for instance, in the south part of Dallas, there's a Redbird Mall. It's over $1 billion construction of a huge mall. So that will, whatever happened until that point is going to affect the future, but after, because of the new information, and it's not new information anymore, but when it was, then you could have anticipated, okay, this is when they're going to finish. building the mall. So it can be, I think in the last, you know, I'm looking 1 to usually around 2 to 3 years. Because more than that, what happened 7 years ago, it's not really relevant, but you're trying to see a trend. You're trying to look at a trend and understand where the submarket is going. And again, nobody has a crystal ball. We can't really know what's going to happen. But if the market historically has been doing 4 or 3% organic growth, then assuming that moving forward you're going to have 7%, just because last year we had 7%. That's not being conservative. That's gambling. So just make sure you're looking. I always look at the history, and then I lower the organic growth. So if the growth has been 4% in the last 2 or 3 years, I use 2 or 2.5 or 3%, because I'm thinking, I'm just assuming that the market is not going to be as strong for the purposes of my underwriting. So one part, as I mentioned, is organic growth. The other part is some sort of forced appreciation, which means if you renovate units and you can increase the rents, then you need to add that to your underwriting as well. But a word of caution here, because you can create the most beautiful apartment, renovate it to very high standard, and say, you know what, I think it's more, now I think I would pay $200 more to get it. You're thinking like an investor. You're not thinking like a tenant. You need to think from the tenant's point of view, because you need to make sure that the population in the area, that the tenant base can afford.
If you're putting in granite in an apartment in South LA, you're not going to get that return on your investment now.
Yeah, you need to look at the competition, see how much they're charging, what's the nicer area renovation in the area, and then measure based on that, assuming that the vintage, that the building,
and amenities too.
I mean,
that's another thing. You got to really look at your amenities.
Exactly. So rent growth is one thing. I also run the numbers based on 0% rent growth, which is very, very extreme. But just to make sure that at least I'm not looking to make money in that scenario, but I want to make sure I'm not losing any money. So that's one thing that rent growth is something that investors should obviously pay attention to. The second thing they should pay attention to, and that's something that and I wrote a Forbes article about that, is that 99% of investors are missing that crucial point, and that's the exit cap rate, or you can call it reversion cap. So if you buy, cap rate is basically it's the purchase price over the NOI, and it's basically the ratio between the purchase price and the NOI. NOI is net operating income, which is what you're left by the end of the month from the income of the property after you paid all the expenses, but before you paid any mortgage payments, any debt. So if you bought it right now, the average, I think the national average, and I'm not talking about Los Angeles, is around 5%. Los Angeles could probably 5%.
We have problems out here.
Well, in Santa Monica it's 2%.
Yeah,
but
it's tough.
It is tough. California is a great place to live in, but very, very tough place to.
It's expensive.
To buy properties in. But so if you buy it at a 5 cap, you need to make sure that you're conservative enough so when you're selling the property, let's say in 7 years, you have an idea of what would be the cap rate in the market. It's got nothing to do with you and everything to do with the market. Because cap rate is something that is being measured in a certain market across all similar properties. So all Class A high-end buildings in the same radius or in the same submarket are being compared based on let's say 4.5 or 4.7 cap. It's not something that you control on. You have no control of. So the reversion cap, the exit cap rate, if you assume that if you buy it today at a 5 cap, that it's still going to be 5 cap after 7 years, that's not, you're being pretty aggressive, because you're assuming that the market is going to be as strong as it is today, which is most
Chances
likely.
It's not going to be.
It's not going to be this, exactly. So And if you change it even to 4.8, the returns are dramatically the returns are dramatically changing.
Right.
So you got to make sure. I usually use 50 basis points to 1 point. So basically, if I buy it at 5 cap, for the exit cap, I assume 5.5 or even 6 cap. So I'm assuming that the market is not as strong, and if the deal still works in the worst market, then it's a good deal.
Right.
So this is something that I see a lot of even sophisticated investors that are buying properties based on an underwriting that has the same cap rate and even lower cap rate. And I don't understand, we're at the peak of the market right now. Maybe there's going to be another peak, but in 7 years,
I don't know, yeah.
probably not going to be any better than this. We already see some signs of slowdown.
Yeah.
So that's the exit cap rate is a crucial component that you need to look into. And that's also another good way when you look at other people's deals, if you want to get into syndication, to look
You're
at
gonna
that.
need to know. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. The third item that I wanted to talk about, besides the rent growth and the exit cap, when I underwrite deals, I'm also, obviously you have the expenses and you have your own assumptions on how much you can, how efficiently you can run the property. But I'm also looking at the debt, and this is something that is very important. Today, because debt has been a bit more challenging to get, a lot
Sure.
of investors are open to do bridge loans. And
that can be tough.
Yeah, that can be tough because bridge loan is only for a few years, and then you need to refinance the property and get place a long-term debt on the property, but you don't know what's going to be the
What
interest
it's going
rate
to be like then.
and the terms exactly
Yeah.
2 years from now. So
They tighten.
exactly.
It can be tough to refi.
So if you're still doing that, just make sure that you're being very conservative with the assumptions regarding the interest rates and the terms that are going to be here 2 and 3 years from now. Because we're already seeing let's just say that 6 months ago and 12 months ago,
Yeah.
we had much better terms and lower interest rates. And just don't assume that you can just refinance it and place a long-term debt in the same interest rate that you have today. Speaking of refinancing, this is something we do not put in our underwriting. I have it there. I can see it's nice to see, but if I want to see how much the property, what the returns are,
Yeah.
I don't include refinancing because that's going to be a bonus for us.
You don't
But
know
you
what it's gonna
don't
be.
know exactly.
It's in the dark at this point, yeah.
Exactly, and it's such a huge factor in the underwriting. So these are my tips on the line items in the underwriting that you need to pay attention to.
Well, one thing I've noticed that you have said, conservative.
Yeah.
She's but also very successful because of the being conservative. Just because you want to be an investor, don't jump at the first deal. Really make sure your numbers work is what I'm taking away from this. And
Yes.
so it's worked well for Ellie. So we're about out of time. So thank you for tuning in. Ellie's podcast, give it to him.
Yes, that really happened. Unbelievable real estate stories. You can find it on iTunes, Stitcher, basically everywhere. You can subscribe to the podcast and hear stories from investors you can understand what's the behind the scenes of real estate investing, how that looks like. And just last one before we finish shooting, I was at a conference recently and I heard a great saying. There was an investor that was at the airport and he wanted to go. Their flight was delayed and the father was very anxious and wanted to be on a plane, but the flight was delayed because of some technical issues. And his son said, "Dad, I'd rather being here on the ground wishing I was up there than being up there wishing I was here." So
That's so true.
yeah, it's okay if you make sure you find the right deal. I know there's a lot of buzz and a lot of excitement around in real estate investing. Yeah. We reject deals on a daily basis, deals that look, interesting.
Some of the best deals you do are the ones you don't do.
Exactly.
They can be painful. But all right, we will put Ellie's podcast information here, and we'll see you next week. And please subscribe. Thank you.